First tonight, Nigeria's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yusuf Tuggar, has dismissed claims by President Trump that the government is involved in religious persecution. Mr. Tuggar said freedom of worship was guaranteed under the Nigerian constitution and insisted such acts were not supported by government at any level. President Trump had warned of possible military action and has threatened to cut aid. It's the first comment by a senior Nigerian government official following Mr. Trump's threats at the weekend. Meanwhile, China has weighed in on the issue, with a Chinese government spokesperson saying Beijing opposes nations using religion or human rights as an excuse to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries and threatening other countries with sanctions and force.
金永南是中国人民朝鲜最高人民会议常任委员会前委员长金永南
On Trump's threat of military deployment in Nigeria, Mandarin, as Nigeria's comprehensive strategic partner, China firmly supports the Nigerian government in leading its people on the development path suited to its national conditions. China firmly opposes any country using religion and human rights as an excuse to interfere in other countries' internal affairs, and threatening other countries with sanctions and force.
我们对遇难者表示深切哀悼。
There is constitutional commitment to religious freedom and rule of law. All the answers are in there. And this is what guides us. And this is what shows that it's impossible for there to be a religious persecution that can be supported in any way, shape, or form by the government of Nigeria at any level, be it federal, be it regional, be it local. It's impossible. And our laws are there, and all the answers lie in this. And what we are trying to make the world understand is that we should not create another Sudan.
And that's the Nigerian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yusuf Tuggar, there. I think he was speaking in Germany. And before him, a foreign ministry spokeswoman from China, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from Washington, D.C. by Arise correspondent Anieze Osakwe. Good to see you, Anieze. So the Nigerian government now starting to really push back against Mr. Trump's threats. We heard from a senior Nigerian government official, the Foreign Minister Yusuf Tuggar. Tell us more about what he's been saying and the context in which he made his comments.
Absolutely. Good to be with you, Charles, as well. I mean, I think at this point, kind of like what you said during the headlines and during that introduction, and then hearing from him as well, they're essentially saying that legally it's impossible for Nigeria to, kind of give the go-ahead to any kind of religious persecution. Like you said, he made these comments while speaking in Berlin in Germany alongside the German foreign minister as well. And I think what's interesting, or what's standing out here to me, is the fact that, yes, this is the first comment we've heard from a senior person in President Tinubu's administration. But earlier today, we also heard from Mohammed Idris, the Minister of Information. He was speaking outside of the State House, and he said something similar, that he had just come from a meeting with President Tinubu and that this administration is essentially committed to national unity. I think it was just yesterday we also heard from the chief of the defense forces, the new General Olufemi Oluyede, also kind of reiterating these same comments that we've heard from different members of President Tinubu's administration. But I think that at a certain point, Nigerians are going to want to hear from President Tinubu himself, as opposed to the key people around him and his administration. This could offer an opportunity for the president to essentially step forward, speak to Nigerians directly at such a critical moment that, as you said, has garnered international attention, global attention from the US and China, two of the world's biggest economies. And if President Tinubu is able to essentially come forward, speak to Nigerians, and offer a clear plan about how the country plans to tackle insecurity of Nigerians of all faiths, they've denied that a Christian genocide is ongoing, but if President Tinubu is able to come forward and himself speak to Nigerians and offer reassurance, because I think at the end of the day, these are people's lives that we're talking about. That would really kind of assuage a lot of fears that Nigerians feel on the ground right now.
I think a lot of people would agree with your assessments there, Anieze, and also, of course, the comments, the initial comments that started all of this came from President Trump. So you'd think that the Nigerian president, if he actually hopes to eventually have a meeting with President Trump, would want to respond at that level. But as you know, China has also thrown its considerable leverage into the fray, weighing in by essentially warning the US not to use religion or human rights as an excuse to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, and threatening those countries with sanctions and force. I mean, how significant is that?
It's definitely a significant step. I mean, it's not as if China has gone so far as to say that they would be willing to back Nigeria if anything happens. They have not said that, so that would be incredibly significant. But it's definitely unexpected, I would say, that China has essentially stepped into this conversation as well. These issues of insecurity in Nigeria started as something that only Nigerians in Nigeria were maybe talking about or dealing with. Then over the weekend, you had President Donald Trump get involved. America is now involved, and now you have China. So, and kind of like what I mentioned just earlier, these are the world's two largest economies. And as we know, China and Africa, or sub-Saharan Africa, have such a strong relationship. And so far, a lot of the reactions that I've been reading on social media, online, and also just in my conversations with people here in the States, is just that they're not... The China's closeness and proximity when it comes to the business and economics of what it means to conduct their businesses in Nigeria is not lost on them. I think it's definitely going to be a welcome development from the Nigerian government to hear that China is essentially backing them or supporting them in this way vis-a-vis the US. But we also shouldn't forget the role that the economics of China's involvement with Nigeria play in all of this as well. Oops, sorry,
Absolutely. And is much being made of China's comments in Washington where you are? Are the hackles of the American government going up, and Beijing's comments perhaps being seen as China strategically positioning itself as countering US influence?
So as of now, I have not seen any, responses, official responses from some of the loudest voices or the most prominent voices when it comes to, Pete Hegseth or Ted Cruz or President Donald Trump responding to these comments. That being said, President Trump recently did an interview here in the U.S. with CBS, and he essentially pointed to the fact that the Chinese relationship with between the U.S. and China right now is better than ever. It's a comment that we also heard from Pete Hegseth as well, the Secretary of Defense. And I think that when we eventually do hear from the U.S., because that's something to be expected at this point, the response may not necessarily be as harsh as we'd expect. I think that President Trump, especially coming off of that meeting that he had with President Xi Jinping in South Korea just a couple of days ago, there seems to be some sort of warming of the relationship between China and the U.S., at least as far as President Trump has communicated to the public. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how they respond to this regarding these allegations, these American allegations of the Christian genocide in Nigeria.
And beyond China, I mean, there seems to be growing criticism, both domestically and internationally, of Mr. Trump's comments, with many viewing his threats as reckless and unbecoming of a world leader. Is that how it's coming across in America?
So I'm really glad you asked this question, because I have talked to a number of just Nigerians here, academics as well. And there's a sense that whenever President Trump speaks or tweets or posts on Truth Social, there is this kind of brash communication style that he's become so known for. So there isn't a surprise whenever, we hear these kinds of comments from the president. That being said, there is a sense that a lot more could have been done from the Nigerian government and Nigerian administrations for the last few decades to prevent something like this from happening in the first place. This issue of insecurity that affects all Nigerians of all faiths, as the government has said, is an issue that has been ongoing. It's been persistent for a number of years. So this isn't something that just happened. Whether, when we look at the timing of this, whether it has to do with President Trump stepping in for the President Tinubu's administration to now nominate ambassadors, now have the foreign minister come out to speak publicly and, try and reassure people that plans are, the wheels are in motion to essentially tamper down on these issues of insecurity, those questions remain unanswered. But that being said, until Nigerians at the end of the day feel safe traveling from point A to point B, until they feel safe from kidnappings and from insecurity, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And whether it took President Trump essentially setting the fire for this to take place, that's a question that needs to be answered. But, at least the wheels seem to be turning at this point.
Indeed, and Mr. Trump, of course, said he was ordering the Pentagon to prepare for possible military action in Nigeria. Is there any evidence of any preparation yet? Because we know that the US has an Africa command, which is responsible for US military operations in Africa.
Yes, and I actually did reach out to AFRICOM essentially, and their response was that they don't discuss current or future posturing of forces, of course, and then they directed me to the Department of War for any further information. So they're staying pretty mum on this issue. But that being said, and something that I mentioned earlier today was the fact that if we remember April of 2017 and we look at what President Trump did in Syria, he essentially launched this surprise attack on a government airbase in Syria after these allegations of the former Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, for using chemical weapons on Syrians and, killing 80 people. These are allegations. That was a surprise attack. There was no, preemptive statement that President Trump was going to do this. The strike happened. The explosion happened. We saw it on video, and then President Trump acknowledged it after it had taken place. Now, I'm definitely not saying that this is something that will happen in Nigeria, but I think we can use that as some sort of a bellwether to see what's possible. President Trump doesn't necessarily always have to communicate exactly what he's going to do before he does it. So, we should definitely keep watching the situation, and we'll definitely keep watching the story for any updates.
Anieze, thank you very much indeed, and keep giving us those updates. Anieze Osakwe is a RISE correspondent. She was talking to me on the line there from Washington, D.C.